My guest today is one of those rare breeds who seems to be able to turn everything he does into gold. As an actor of immense power and diversity, a rapper of cutting-edge material, and an activist dedicating himself to the betterment of the world, Riz Ahmed is indeed an extraordinary man. And it was through one of his most recent films, Sound of Metal, whereby he plays the lead role of a drummer losing his hearing, that brought us together for the first time. So that was quite a film because, of course, we met at a private viewing of Sound of Metal. And I'm just intrigued, really, with the huge success it has had, not least 6 Oscar nominations, for which 2 were won, how you came to this role, how you were approached to be part of this film, and what you thought about the subject, the actual storyline.
Well, I have to say that I knew very little about the subject matter when I first took on the project. I didn't have much contact with the deaf community. I had never played the drums before. I wasn't a recovering addict, at least not in the kind of narcotic sense. And so it really was an introduction into all these worlds in a way that was really eye-opening and enriching and almost quite life-changing in a way. I mean, in terms of how I came to the project, it happened really very quickly and in quite an unexpected way. It wasn't like a project that I had an eye on or was aware of. Darius Marder, writer-director, I don't think he was kind of vaguely aware of me, but it was really my agent who I should credit with putting us in touch, saying, hey, this is a script that's gone unmade for the best part of a decade. And I think it's a brilliant script, and for some reason it can't get made. And he put us together, and when we met up, we just immediately had this affinity. I think we both had this hunger to just kind of be pushed out of our comfort zones and to take on challenges that were quite daunting. And I think for Darius, the ambition behind a film like this for his first feature was daunting but also exhilarating. And similarly for me, learning how to drum or learning sign language and also taking on the emotional kind of challenge of this project was exciting and also scary.
And I suppose that when you see a script, I mean, what comes first? Do you look at the script? Do you spend time with that script? Or is it equally important to see the team and to meet the team of people whom you might be working with and sense that chemistry?
Well, it's really both. I mean, the script comes first. You usually read the script, and a fantastic script is the backbone of any great project. And this was a fantastic script, that was without a doubt. And then, of course, the other 50% of the equation is, do you gel with your creative partners? And none are more important than your director. So in this case, I wasn't sure what Darius would be like, but we just immediately clicked. I think, we're kindred spirits in many ways. And, he really is one of those people who has an infectious sense of self-belief, and a belief in the work and what the work means and what it can do and how it can be life-changing for those who make it and those who watch it. And that sense of mission, that sense of daring, that boldness infused every creative decision he made, whether it was deciding to shoot on film, and how expensive and time consuming that is for a low budget film, through to deciding that they wouldn't cheat the music and I would actually have to learn how to play the drums and actually be playing them on camera, or the sound design and how ambitious and involved that was. He really just had this kind of sense of ambition and adventure and can do, which I think just inspired everyone on the team.
And I think, when You had so much to do, and I would imagine that as an actor, you're very often out of your comfort zone. But here we are, you know, you're faced with having to learn American Sign Language, ASL, also play the drums, and immerse yourself in the deaf community. I mean, how did you go about those steps? Because that's quite a mammoth path to embark on.
Yeah, it's one step at a time, I
Yes.
guess. One scary step at a time. And I think one thing I learned from this project, there was also a kind of physical element to it in terms of working out to get to a certain kind of physique. And it's interesting because I think that the older you get, the more you realize how important it is to be able to be comfortable with discomfort.
Mm.
You know, that you have to be prepared to be terrible at playing the drums for 5.5 of those 7 months, and then just about passable for like a month. And in the week before you shoot, something clicking. You have to be prepared to be uncomfortable with it. You have to be prepared to put yourself in that position of not liking what you're doing, not thinking it's good enough, and sometimes being in, states of physical pain with your working out, or kind of emotional pain or embarrassment, or frustration. And if you can kind of push through that discomfort, then one step at a time, does lead you quite some way down the road. Um, and it was really that process. It was really down to the patience of my teachers as well. Guy Carter on drums, Jeremy Lee Stone on American Sign Language, Leighton Grant, my physical trainer, who's also hard of hearing. So it was really a kind of, it takes a village, and it takes time.
And so, with all of those disciplines, have they remained with you? Have you felt, yes, you know what, I'd quite like to continue playing the drums or continue with ASL?
Well, I maintained some friendships, in particular with Jeremy Stone, in the deaf community. And so there's, some of my rusty ASL kind of comes back to the surface when we hang out and we talk. In terms of physical training, I think that's something that's become a part of my life. Just because I kind of feel like psychologically it's impact, again, the discipline of putting yourself in states of discomfort, breathing through the discomfort, is something that I've found very centering, because in many ways I share, a lot of the traits that Ruben has. Ruben is someone who's a workaholic, who's always on the go, and suddenly he defines himself through his creative passions. And when that's taken away from him, then he's often kind of it feels like he's sinking. And that's something that actually I experienced with COVID lockdown. And I found kind of that physical discipline of being in the body to be something that was very, very centering. And in a way, a way of keeping my own addiction at bay, of workaholism.
And I suppose that, I mean, you mentioned Ruben, the lead character in Sound of Metal, and a lot of what happens in being deaf is centering. I mean, it is very much related to where you are in your environment, because you are trying to pick up clues from all around you. But I think this whole past year with COVID has allowed us all to listen, and perhaps, globally we're addressing the difference between hearing and listening. And has there been, something within the deaf community that you have learned that perhaps you have not been aware of before?
Oh, yeah, massively. I mean, I feel the deaf community taught me the true meaning of listening. Listening is so different from hearing. Hearing is a physical sense. It's a biological process. Listening is something to do with your attention and your energy, and where you place it, and how you hold space for someone else's energy with your attention. It's much more, it's an act of absorption, of osmosis. It's a meditative act. It's times a kind of spiritual act, listening. It's about yeah, it's about kind of removing the barrier between yourself and the other. I think
Mm,
it's most profound, and I feel like the deaf community, or many of the deaf people I hang out with, are the best listeners I've ever met.
mm,
In terms of attention, in terms of energy exchange, um, in terms of overcoming the barriers that society or our senses may have placed between us in order to create an open space of communication. I feel the deaf community taught me the true meaning of communication. In particular with American Sign Language, Jeremy Stone would say to me, listen, hearing people are emotionally repressed. And he would joke with me and I'd say, what? I don't know what your take is on that, Evelyn, but I thought I was okay, that's interesting. And when I became more fluent in ASL, it was only then that I understood what he was talking about, because communicating about, I don't know, my family or even my character in ASL would bring a tear to my eye in a way that communicating with words would not or could not. And that's
mm,
because that physical communication is embodied in a different way. It is
mm,
communicating from your core, from your body. You talking from the soles of your feet and not without even using words. And there's something in that stayed with me. So I feel like yeah, listening, communication, all these things were taught to me in their most fundamental and profound way by the deaf community.
Wow, I mean, you've expressed that so incredibly powerfully and eloquently. And do you think that, having learned ASL and spent time within the deaf community, do you feel that has influenced what you are doing as a musician?
That's a really great question. That's a really, really great question. I sometimes think about this because, of course, many deaf people have varying levels of hearing. Some people will be able to pick up the vibrations of bass. Some people, will be able to pick up more. It really varies. So, um, I'd love to hear from you about this, but from my understanding is that the deaf experience of music is a multifaceted and varied one. And I guess I've thought less about, how to, although some of my music is quite bass heavy. And so I hope that it may be the kind of thing that many people who are, close to complete deafness even can kind of pick up on rhythmically and vibrationally. So in a strange way, I feel that it has made my creative process a more internal one, a
Mm,
more a more emotional one, and that's because I think Sound of Metal and the character Ruben really reminded me of of what the role of art really is, of creativity really is, which is a kind of therapy, you know. And I think for many years I was making music, which I stand by and I'm proud of, but was thinking more about how can I serve my community?
mm,
How can I make music that can express the experience of others so others can find themselves in this, who
mm,
may not be able to find themselves elsewhere? If you look at and my mixtape Englistan or my music with the Sweatshop Boys, I felt though it was a catharsis, but it was also a kind of community service.
mm,
And I think after Sound of Metal, it's really re-emphasized for me how creativity at its most impactful is intimate. It's intimately personal. And with music like my more recent track, Once Kings, that's just very much about me kind of unpacking my heart. And so yeah, in a strange way, I haven't tried to shift my music in order to cater to different kind of hearing capacities. I've thought more about actually music and art isn't about who hears it at all. It's about the creative act of catharsis. Doesn't matter
mm,
if no one hears it.
mm. It's so interesting because, in a way, you could say, well, doesn't that sound a bit selfish? But actually, it has to come from within. There is this sense of extreme journey that a person goes through when they're experimenting with ideas, and in a way, something that comes from that person. It is an internal source, and it has to be true to themselves. But I think also what's interesting about Sound of Metal is how it, in a way, portrays that message of inclusivity. So it starts where Ruben is really trying to fight the world of deafness and doesn't want to be in that type of community, that world, doesn't want to be part of it, but then bit by bit realizes that, my gosh, this is a whole different landscape that is completely open, and everything is accessible if we give ourselves time. And that peaceful scene at the end when you're sitting on a bench, and just simply looking up and being with yourself and being with the sound world around you is quite powerful, actually, because you're not giving or taking, you're just simply almost accepting as it is, and that's quite extraordinary. And you're right, as creative beings, we're always trying to serve, we're always trying to think, oh well, that's who's coming along to my concert, so therefore we'll tick the box for this and that. And yes, it is really, really interesting.
I think it's something that's hardwired into us as all humans, this idea of seeking the validation of our community, of our audience, of the people around us, seeking that social acceptance. And yet, to be an artist, I think you also have to risk ostracization. You have to risk being outcast, and I think in particular, as performers, often we seek that round of applause, we seek that validation on some level. It's hard, it's taught to us, and yet you have to, on some level, be prepared to turn your back on the audience and face yourself. And what I find interesting is that of course you can take that to an extreme, and if it goes to an extreme, that becomes indulgent, for sure. So it's always about balance. But what I find is, more often than not, when you honestly face yourself, you are communicating directly to an audience. When you really go to an internal place, you really are hitting the back of the room. Nothing resonates more than emotion. I think.
It's so wonderful what you're saying there, because in a way, when we think about and experience Sound of Metal, I mean, my initial reaction was that, gosh, this is very powerful, not just to people who like to see films, but for the medical community, for education, for everybody to think about, what does listening mean to me? Have I thought about listening? What is the difference between hearing and listening? And you've expressed this so powerfully, and I think the film really, I think, can be a very important tool for many different disciplines in a way. So I'm just absolutely delighted that it exists, and for you giving such a powerful performance in it. And just
thank
talk.
you, Evelyn. But can I just say, I'm so glad that you exist. This film couldn't exist without you and people like you, who consistently are breaking the mold in terms of people's preconceptions about what's possible and who belongs where and who can do what. In a small way, I think we kind of found that even in making this film, with so many incredible deaf non-actors lighting up the screen and bringing this film to life. I think it takes people like you, honestly, to break that mold, that allow us to kind of reimagine what's possible. So thank you.
No, not at all. And I think also, without dwelling on this too much, but we have seen a real shift, I suppose, in how we categorize disabilities in general. And I think this film has played a massive part in that, along with technology, because of course the film experiments with Ruben being fitted with cochlear implants, and I mean, it's such an interesting journey, that, because of course we imagine that cochlear implants, that's great, you can now hear, and of course you had this whole journey of trying to decipher this extraordinary, dizzying world of sound, and to the extent of wanting to take off and get rid of the cochlear implants, and it's very difficult to define disability, to define deafness, blindness, a person in a wheelchair, and so on, unless you're actually in contact with a community who's experiencing those things on many different levels.
Yeah, it's the immersion within the deaf community was absolutely instrumental in trying to bring the story to life authentically, as was immersion within the addiction recovery community, and also, the kind of punk metal kind of scene in New York, which was very much new to me. But I love what you're saying about the redesignation of disability as different abilities, as differing ability. The idea of being handicapped, of being kind of unable, compared to the majority, is really only a kind of social reality. That's the reality within our society because of the way our society is set up. But like I said, I'm an actor. I've been acting for 15 years in films. I got taught more about listening and communication by the deaf community and my sign instructor than I had in 15 years of working professionally and years of acting training.
Yep.
Where's the disability? Who's at a disadvantage or an advantage? I mean, it's something that we really, I think, there's so much work to be done here. I've spent some time talking about the importance of representation, and people used to call it diversity, and some people still do. That's that's really really important. We've been talking about it with regards to race, but I feel like the conversation around, again, I mean, I can't even hesitate to use the word disability, is so lagging behind. It's almost like we need to find a language for it. With people have been talking about neurodiversity, for example, rather than people with like learning disabilities or whatever. And I'd love us to kind of reach for a language that kind of celebrates the richness and diversity of human experience, rather than creating a kind of pegging order of one kind of experience being more valuable than another. Make no mistake, one kind of experience is a hell of a lot harder than the other, because we've set up this kind of societal segregation between hearing and deaf, between blind and seeing, and and some of that's some of that's just the way it's been, but it's not, doesn't necessarily have to be the way it is going forwards. Now, if this all sounds a bit abstract, giving a more specific example, why aren't more films in cinemas subtitled? It's just a pretty simple thing I mean, why aren't more screenings subtitled? Now, with streaming at home, it's great that people can turn on subtitles should they want to. That's actually in a way, I feel that's the biggest argument for streaming, against cinemas. But as more cinemas introduce closed caption screenings, as we can kind of find apps that kind of sync up live to theater screenings, these are the kind of things that are so easy to overlook with hearing privilege. Just as an example, that I think we're starting to shift, and we've got a lot further to go.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and I sometimes wonder, well, do we need a language as opposed to just acceptance? just to understanding. So much has been talked about mental health over this past year, but we're not actually categorizing people who necessarily have mental health problems. It's just that the circumstances of COVID, with loneliness and so on, and various other things, have created mental health issues. But we're not necessarily suddenly putting them, into a category. And I think that with the advancement of technology, do we need another language? I mean, should it be a case, or could it be a case whereby we are a society that simply embraces, accepts, has the patience for, has the means to be adaptable whenever possible to people's circumstances? And that would be an amazing thing, an amazing world to live in. But I understand that that's ideal. But
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like we do, I guess on some level, we do need to have some kind of categories, and we do need to have these kind of definitions, these neat boxes to describe what is in fact a kind of a rainbow spectrum, right? Like we all have things in our body that challenge us, someone might have cataracts, someone might be blind, someone may have tinnitus, someone may be completely deaf.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating what you've been saying, Riz, about your experiences with the deaf community and how inclusion and access is so important. And just the last thing I think about Sound of Metal, did you feel that when we think about Ruben, the character, did you feel somehow he was redefined? I mean, we mentioned categories and so on, and at the beginning of the film we saw a musician, a punk drummer, and we could almost put that person in boxes. But then as the character progressed, did you find that actually Ruben is very much a different person?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, I feel like I put Ruben into boxes and categorized him when I first approached him. And by the end of the process, he'd become a different person. But I'd also found myself in the character, and I hope that that's the journey that I go on with every character, but also the audiences go on with every character, is that you start off by saying, okay, this person's totally different to me. I've got nothing in common with this person. Like, I might be able to relate to them in this way or that way, but this is a separate experience than mine. It's a separate life than my own. And by the end of going on this journey with a character, what I hope an audience feels is, this is me. I feel this person's pain. This person's fears are my fears. Through the this empathic act of storytelling, we find ourselves within these characters. And certainly that's something that I felt, starting off with, man, this guy's nothing like me. How am I going to play a character that's different to me? And then by the end of the journey going, wow, I have my own addictions, I guess. Well, I keep people at bay through, pursuing the workaholism of my creative passions, all these kind of dynamics and that you kind of think of as being someone else's, you ultimately realize are your own. And it's interesting because that's the only reason why acting is possible, right? It's because we all have different thoughts and beliefs, but we all have the same feelings. And when you really just tap into those feelings, you find yourself in that character. And so I guess all of that is to say is that Ruben, I think, starts off thinking of himself as one kind of person. And by the end of the movie, he's not playing in a band. He's not a hearing person. He's not in a relationship. All of these circumstantial things that he defined himself through have changed. So who is he?
Mm.
He's still Ruben. Yeah, he's someone totally different. And it really kind of explodes the whole concept of identity in a way when you go through those kind of changes. And it did for me, going through the changes of becoming Ruben, really kind of stretched my concept of who I am or who I could be, and really put me in touch with this profound truth, which is that inside each of us is all of us.
Mm. And once the filming finishes, that is done and dusted, and then it's over to the next creative team to put it all together. I mean, do you find it difficult to release yourself from the character, or does it naturally take its course after that intense filming period?
I think that there's a process of almost grieving, of letting go, or when it's not, doesn't happen consciously. Consciously, you're just, okay, wow, I get to, sleep in a bit in the mornings and not be up at 4 a.m. Okay. But I think your body takes a minute to let go of those experiences. And to some extent, I think it never does let go of them. Hopefully the pain or the joy that you experience in a scene or on camera are truthful. They're real. They're physically identical to that which you might experience in your own life, just experienced in a different context with different characters around you, and a camera happens to be rolling. And so to some extent, I feel that those experiences that you go through should never leave you. They don't, they're recorded in the body, they're recorded in the mind and the heart, and hopefully, in being so recorded, they kind of expand you. They expand your inner life. It puts you in touch with there's now a different dimension to yourself that's available to you and those around you that wasn't there before the project. So I kind of almost think about this as kind of almost like you're adding lives, you're adding people to who you are. If that makes sense. So I kind of hope it does stay with you. I hope it does kind of expand you as an actor, and I hope the same is true of audiences. I hope those characters stay with audiences and they expand their idea of themselves, and in stretching to relate to this character that they had initially thought was so different to them, that expands their idea of themselves.
It's very, very interesting. And I suppose when you think about you as the musician and as the actor, I mean, I'm just curious, what came first? Had you always been interested in music, or had there always been this inkling to be an actor, even although you studied at Oxford University and studied politics and economics and goodness knows? I mean, it just seemed another world.
Yeah, I guess, when I first got to Oxford, I had attended a private school on a kind of bursary, on a kind of government assisted place. So I wasn't totally, kind of coming from I had experienced being around privilege before, but even then going to Oxford did feel like a different world, even to that. And it was unsettling, and actually holding on to what I'd been doing before, which was rapping and MCing and, performing on pirate radio stations and at local parties. Holding on to that was really a lifeline for me. Music got me through that, my university experience. I started putting on club nights. It was, it was something that actually put money in my pocket as well. And I guess kind of connected me to where I was coming from and where I thought wanted to go. In a way, I felt like Oxford was a kind of strange, a surreal interlude, one that I couldn't say no to, one that I thought was maybe taking me off my path in some ways. But what you realize is sometimes those tangents, going the long way around, it can actually also add experience that is invaluable to you. And I think it did that as well. In terms of what came first, my mum saw that I was this hyperactive kid from a young age, and she put me in this after school speech and drama class, where you would kind of recite poems, and all this kind of stuff. And like an examiner would come and, give you a grade, speech and drama, grade 1, grade 2, and all this kind of stuff. She did that for a couple of years between the age of like 8 and 10. And then when I went to high school, again, that was a bit of a kind of shock for me. And I was like, what am I, I remember I was quite a troublesome kid. And at the age of 11, I put a chair through a window in my first week at school. And the teacher was kind of said to me, if you want to mess around in my classroom, you're going to get suspended or expelled. And if you want to mess around on stage, you'll get a round of applause. So what do you want to do? Yeah. And it kind of nudged me towards acting, and there were these after school plays and stuff. And, it was very, very, very cathartic for me. It was very therapeutic. I think performing just allowed me to kind of air out a lot of intense feelings I had as a young teenager. It allowed me to kind of navigate my sense of not belonging in this predominantly white upper class school which it was at that time. Although over my 7 years, it kind of gradually really shifted and became much more multicultural. It was kind of like a microcosm of the country almost, in a strange way. It allowed me to deal with my sense of not belonging by becoming someone else, and in a weird way, I was acting from a very young age, because I was flipping between speaking Urdu at home in a working class Pakistani household to being in this more kind of posh white private school, to then hanging out with my friends outside of that, who were part of a different world and a different scene, the swagger of the 90s British Asian kind of rude boy scene. And so I was kind of acting from a young age. So that had always been there. But, finding my own voice came from music. That came from emceeing. That came from rapping. That came from hearing, listening to hip hop, and then listening to UK garage and jungle, and finding something in the energy and the frequency and of that it just resonated with me so immediately. I mean, I was such a hyperactive kid. Even the way I'd speak almost felt like I was rapping already. You know what I mean? So it just fit me again. It was very much a therapy for me.
And I guess being in all of the different types of communities, you mentioned, well, mainly white kids at school, and then perhaps your friends were Asian, and so on and so forth. That's a fantastic sort of preparation for being an actor and putting yourself in different situations in a way.
Yeah, it is. It can be very confusing for a while until you realize in retrospect that it's actually an asset.
Yeah.
You realize looking back, okay, wow, that molded me, that shaped me. And, that's often the way, right? The challenges end up being the gifts. That's certainly what Ruben's experience is in Sound of Metal. The challenge of deafness actually brings him closer to himself and others than he's ever been.
And I mean, I'm intrigued just, when you're describing the immense power, and as you said, you seem to find your voice as a rapper and listening to different types of music. But in a way, I wonder why in the film Sound of Metal that they made Ruben a drummer, as opposed to a type of music that you are already involved with, using the voice.
Well, I think to use your voice, you have to kind of be prepared to take center stage a bit more. And I think what with Ruben, often with drummers, although it's not true of all drummers, and particularly, seeing your performances, I'm not sure if it's true of you, but sometimes drummers in bands, they are in service to the singer and the rhythmic,
Mm, mm,
sections, but also they're in the background, they're at the back, they can hide behind the armor and the weaponry of their cannons, and I think there's something about Ruben losing that suddenly makes him feel more exposed,
mm,
without his weaponry. Um, I also think that there's something about drumming, and I don't mean this no offense, but I think drummers are crazy. Uh, there's an obsession and a physicality and a all body immersion to drumming that is literally mind blowing. You have to build different kinds of neural circuitry to play the drums. I think in the way that you have this multi-limb coordination, and it is different to most instruments. I think I'm not saying that there isn't some incredible intricacy to playing the harp or the guitar or piano. There is, but you're not using your entire body literally in the same way.
mm.
You're not smashing an object incredibly hard hundreds of times a minute in the same way. There's something just physically so intense about it. And I think that just felt really right for the characters. So the psychological obsession and the physical aggression uh,
Mm.
and precision that comes with drumming. I think, yeah, there's just something primal about it.
And there's something whereby the body is so well balanced, even if you're pounding on the drums, the body is really physically, posture-wise, really
Mm.
well balanced. As you say, you're using all of the limbs, and every pore of that body is,
Yeah,
you know, is part of the drumming. And in a way, that's the case with sign language too. The body has to be incredibly well balanced and in tune with the air around the person in a
yeah,
way, you know.
yeah. I guess. I mean, I guess for me, sign language was easier because it was so social and enjoyable. I enjoy socializing and meeting new people. The drums, I felt like I had to face myself a lot more. You
Hmm,
know,
interesting.
I think the drums do make you face yourself. Interestingly, the way you strike the drum is a real reflection of like your emotional frequency at that moment, I think.
Hmm.
At least until you can develop the craft to obscure what you're feeling and make it mechanical. But perhaps then it just feels mechanical. I mean, I'm interested to kind of actually hear from you. Like, do you feel that there is something kind of spiritual almost about the drums? Because I kind of glimpsed some of that, and if so, why? And what do you think that is? That's kind of there's something, I guess a lot of spirit. Yeah, I mean it's ancient, isn't it? But I'd love to get your take on that the mind body spirit element of drumming.
It's such a fascinating question, and I don't know the answer, to be honest. Reese, I think that I was just about to call you Reuben there, but I think a lot of it, for me anyway, has to do with the natural posture that the body is in. I mean, if you can imagine a flute and take the flute away, the body is in an unnatural position. And there's
Hmm.
only so long that you could keep that position for, or if you took the violin away but kept the posture, trombone, harp, even, so many instruments, oboe, and where, the body is just not in a position that we would naturally be in. But of course, when we're babies, we're using all of our limbs and they're just so free and they'll go in any direction and bend in any direction. And the kind of acrobatics that babies get themselves into, legs up in the air and arms doing something completely different, that if we were asked to do that now, we would have to think about it. But I think drumming aligns the body really, really well, and therefore the sound can be fed really in a natural way, so we can digest the sound diet in a way. That's how I feel, and
Wow.
I can last a long time playing drums, whereas I can last less time playing a marimba or a vibraphone or a xylophone or something, or tubular bells or whatever. But with drumming, I can really last an awful long time. I mean, I remember a little while ago just giving myself a little challenge of just playing a closed snare drum roll, so just on a snare drum, and just playing that for 30 minutes non-stop. Now, of course, people have done that much longer, but it was actually relatively easy to do, and it
Mm.
was so incredibly therapeutic. And it's just, I feel, because that body is in its natural position. So I don't think it's
Wow.
any more than that, really.
That's amazing. So then when your body's in that kind of position, then you become in a relaxed, almost meditative position. It's at that point that you can become a vessel for the vibrations around you. And in that sense, perhaps it has something in common with singing, where it's when you're, in your that proper supported kind of posture, you're not pushing, you're a vessel. And it's interesting you say this because
Mm.
the older I get, the more I realize the value of some of the acting training that I really dismissed when I was a kid, which was about holding your posture and
Mm.
training your voice to be open. And I remember when I went to drama school, I thought, man, these people are trying to change me, they're trying to change how I walk and talk, and I'm not interested. And actually, when you look back now, you're like, wow, something about maintaining an open channel. It's almost maybe something to do with the chakras or something, right? Where you have the open channels that you can kind of be a vessel, that you can transmit, that you can resonate. So wow,
Yeah.
that's really, really interesting. So it's a kind of meditative posture that you think.
It sort of, I suppose, but I don't really pop it in a meditative box, really. Because at the
Mm,
end of the day, you know, in my case, I'm 5'2", I've relatively short arms, I have fat, stubby hands, and so on and so forth. So this is the engine I have to work with. So I can't uh, copy someone who, if they're 6 foot and have long arms or something, that is their engine. So I couldn't really, I have to allow a technique to allow my body to reach out to that technique rather than trying to force a technique into my body, so that the technique has to align to my body. And that's really important. And otherwise we're forever practicing 8 hours a day trying to do something technical, but if it's just not resonating and fitting our body, it's just like trying on a suit or something that's 2 sizes too big or 2 sizes too small, and it can be the most expensive suit in the world, but it's not going to work on that body. So
it has to, I guess, yeah, this is so interesting what you're saying because it resonates a lot with what I've been, some of what I've been thinking about acting, which is, again, it has to come from within. Sometimes we can, again, you're trying on the suit externally of another character. And, sometimes that can be really pleasurable as an actor to try on that suit and as an audience to
mm,
watch those kinds of performances. But I don't know, I think there's something so profound that happens when when it kind of comes from within, when you try and find the version of the character that already exists within you and you let
mm,
that out.
And I mean, it was fascinating what you were saying much early on about that journey of knowing that you're not going to do something very well for a period, and then for 1 month you'll do it okay, and then at the last moment a switch will go on, and aha, everything is lining up. And I mean, that happens even if people regard you as an expert in something. There's always this sort of discomfort, and necessary discomfort, in order for us to try this, try that, ask questions in all different directions. But yes, but there is something amazing about drumming. I think also with a lot of drumming is that you can, for example, with your drum kit in Sound of Metal, you could put the cymbals in different places. You could mix the drums up. You could play left-handed or right-handed or whatever. So you can always push the boundaries physically of what the body does,
Mm,
not just in how hard something is struck, but literally the placement. And that will kind of mix up your your balance, you know, even if you just said, right, I'll put my hi-hat on the left side or on the right-hand side, it suddenly changes your whole sound and your whole relationship to what you do and your whole coordination and balance and whatever. But you can do that with drumming, and that's what's so interesting.
For sure. I mean, that's something that I was forced to do because I'm left-handed, and I sometimes find myself. We started off actually drumming right-handed because left-handed people have to learn to do a lot of things right-handed in this right-handed world that we live in. And so I thought I was drumming right-handed, and then they were like, "No, actually, you should drum left-handed." So we crossed it over, and then in the end, we drummed left-handed but kind of open. And it's so interesting because it was me trying to find again what my natural posture is. You know, what's the most resonant physical kind of shape for me to flow in, you know. And that was its own journey of discovery. So I felt like I had to relearn the drums like 2 or 3 times within that 6 months. And it's interesting as well about body tension, because something that I didn't realize I was doing the whole of that 6 months was using my jaw as a metronome. I was kind of going, I don't know, do you have any weird tics like that? I'm guessing not anymore. But I was kind of going,
moving your jaw
wiggling
from
my
side to
jaw
side.
from side to side, as a metronome. I didn't realize I was doing it. And it was only the day before we were shooting that my drum teacher filmed me from an angle where I could see that I was doing that. I said, "What the hell am I doing?" He's like, "What do you mean? I thought that was a character choice. You've been doing that for 6 months." I didn't want to get in, and I said, "I just look crazy. I can't do that." So the whole of the day that we were shooting, that next day, I was focused purely on not wiggling my jaw. And you know what? It was the best that I'd ever played it. And sometimes it's interesting thinking about something else or allowing your mind to rest on a point of focus, like I'm going to relax my jaw, allows your brain to switch off from trying to think its way through the drum sequence, and suddenly the drums are playing you. So it was a crazy, weird thing. I feel like it taught me a lot about life and flow and acting, and you know what I mean? Where you put your attention, and actually where thinking is not useful, where you need to step out of the way.
Fascinating, that really. And it's funny because you imagine that, and very often it's sometimes expressed to me as the percussion player, where maybe people may comment on, wow, you must have strong wrists or strong hands, or oh, you have fast wrists or fast hands and so on. But actually all of this starts from literally where your feet are planted, you know, where your bum is, where your neck is, where your head is, where your shoulder is, and the wrists are, or the hands are the last thing in a way that is considered, that it's literally getting everything else sorted, and the wrists and hands will take then care of themselves, and then the sticks are like the extension of the hands, and
Wow.
that's where the power will come.
It's
And
got to come from the center. It's
it
got to come from the
really,
center.
it's got to come from the center, and I would probably say beyond that, even come from literally the space you're in. That's why I think sign language is so interesting, because as you mentioned earlier, it's the flow, you know. People don't necessarily sign language to themselves, you know, speak to themselves in sign language. We will speak to ourselves, you know, we often do, but with sign language, people don't speak to themselves in sign language. Not so much. You might come out with an odd sign here and there, but you're not actually chatting to yourself in sign language. And so it's a very giving language, and drumming is a very giving thing, even if it's internal, of course, but it's filling the space with vibration, literally.
It's so interesting, isn't it? It's like breathing, right? You breathe in the external environment, you bring it into yourself, it mixes with your energy, and then you breathe out and you give back to the environment. And something, I don't know, again, just thinking about acting, it's like, you breathe in the other person's energy and then you breathe out your intention. So you need to, you kind of check you're not holding your breath and you're not holding that kind of body tension, so things can just happen as part of the flow. Often we talk about trying to find a flow state as performers. If we get out of the ways of our body, there is a flow that is constantly happening in the body breathing. And kind of what you're describing to me, in absorbing your environment and then retransmitting into that environment, that is breath. You know what I mean? That flow, that exchange of energy, that is also breath. So I do think it's interesting. I don't know, whenever you kind of one of the things I love most about acting is you get to get a little glimpse into other disciplines and crafts and skills. And the more of them you check out, whether it's like, I had to learn a bit of surfing for, when I did Girls with Lena Dunham, or learning the drums here, or how to fire a gun on my last film, and what you realize is, this may sound stupid to people who are smarter than me, who clocked this a long time ago, but it is all about trying to find a state of flow. And that is all about breathing. And it's all about breathing from your center and drumming from your center, and drumming as you breathe, and breathing as you drum, and breathing as you pull the trigger, and pulling the trigger from the center. It's so, and it's what's kind of crazy to me is that no one teaches you this. There are no classes in school about kind of finding flow, finding your, you know what I mean? It might sound like really abstract, but I feel like so much of life, comes down to that. Relationships with yourself, with others, how you conduct yourself. If you can kind of remember to breathe and breathe from your center, you're more than halfway there. I don't know. Strangely, this conversation ended up being one about yoga or something. I don't know what's going on, but we're here, we're doing it.
Well, and on that note, I think I read somewhere, or someone had mentioned, which I thought was a terrific idea, that every household should have a set of drums. And I think that's a great thing to advocate for,
With earplugs. Really distributed too. Yeah.
Oh, Riz, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I know time is moving on, and you've been so incredibly generous. I'm going to just ask one more question, even although I've got an awful lot of questions that I'd love to ask, but one more, and this is just something that I'm just putting upon you now. And that is, if you happen to be stranded on a desert island and you could choose 5 sounds, so not pieces of music, but 5 sounds, what might they be? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I think one would be birdsong.
Aha.
Yeah, I find it really therapeutic when I can hear that, Another one would be the sound of the ocean, for sure. I think that'd be another thing. I think voice. Yeah, sound of voice. Depends if I'm there on my own or not. But that I think that would be good. Now I'd like to think that I could craft some kind of bongo drums on a desert island. And if I could, I would love to be able to hear them. I think there's just something very primal and communicative, but about the drums, and something very therapeutic. So I think that's 4. And the 5th one have to be the sound of any airplanes flying overhead in case they could come rescue me. So if I can hear them coming, that's about it, I think.
That's not a bad list, Riz. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I just want to say congratulations again for such a stunning performance in Sound of Metal, and all the success it has had. It's been an extraordinary experience to see that, and I hope you can get back home soon. because you are.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your encouragement from when you first saw a cut of the film, and we were so anxious to know what you might think of it, and having your support and your endorsement of it, it just means the world to all of us who are involved in it. So thank you, and thank you for being such an inspiration.
You're very welcome, Riz. Thank you.